Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Fulton, and I am with you tonight as the Niagara Peninsula branch presents its webinar. Just a couple things right off the hop. We would ask that everyone keep their cameras off during this time, as it does get distracting. And we will be hosting a Q&A at the end for our speaker to answer any of your questions that you brought this evening. So with that, I just want to go through a few slides on behalf of the branch, and then we want to turn this over to our speaker. So again, thank you again for joining us tonight. This will be recorded and placed in the members only section of our website, and you can review it there at your leisure. Just to remind everybody, the Ontario Genealogical Society membership is now open November 1st. Everyone who joins for the month of November is entered into an early bird draw. So if you do get an opportunity to renew, you'll have that chance to do so. And as well, our Grow Our Family campaign is back again. And if you're an existing member and like to get half off of your membership, all you need to do is find a new member. And there's lots out there. And you and them can get 50% off your OGS membership for 2021. In concern to our location in Thorold, our Lock 7 viewing center is closed to the public due to the ongoing COVID situation. But on our website, you can find many things like our publications, our searchable indexes, which we seem to be putting on a new one every month. And as well, if you're interested in why we are at the Lock 7 Viewing Center, that is of the Welling Canal, and the big lake boats go right by. And we have a live feed of those cameras that you can check out on our website, and you can view them, get the times, learn a little bit about maritime boat history, and maybe even find out your ancestors were involved in it. So if you go to niagara.ogs.on.ca, you'll find out more information on our website there. And finally, I just wanted to make sure that we shared all the different opportunities our branches and special interest groups across the province are doing. This is a complete list of all the webinars in November. And we're about halfway through. So of course, most of them are in the members only, but there are some coming up. And all of these webinars are free except the military records course put on by the Toronto branch. But I would encourage you to visit each branch or special interest group to learn more about their online webinars and if there's a cost or what time and stuff like that. This calendar is put out monthly on the Society Facebook group. And you can see the December one will be coming out very shortly. So with that, I believe that is all the slides that I have for this evening. I just want to introduce our speaker for this evening, Rhonda Hoffman. And the topic tonight is finding your female ancestors. The nice thing about Niagara is that we're a border community, and we do tend to find people that's gone back and forth across the border. I was just speaking to Rhonda that there's a very large cemetery. I forget the name at this moment, but that you can go and visit. Oh, yes, thank you. But they have the archives right on the property, and they have an index on their website that you can search, and you can find many Canadians within that index. So there's lots of great resources on both sides of the borders for finding your ancestors. So with all that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can take over the screen share, and away you go.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Let's see here. It's great to be with you all today. My name is Rhonda Hoffman. As mentioned earlier, I'm the genealogy specialist in the Grosvenor Room, which is the special collections department at the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library. There we have genealogy, local history, maps, music scores, and rare books. We are open the same hours as the rest of the library. The only thing that you would ever need to make an appointment for is to view a rare book. Right now with COVID, we're not showing rare books. And right now the library just closed again to the public today. So we're not going to be open for a little while, but we do still answer email questions and we do still answer telephone questions. So you can always try to contact us. So I'll get into my presentation. I'm going to get Steve a handout, a PDF file of a handout that I have for this class. So all of the main points in this presentation will be in the handout. Where to find the records mentioned is going to be in the handout, and all the websites are going to be in the handout. I'm going to mention just a few databases that I'll refer to throughout the presentation. One is Ancestry Library Edition, which is the library version of Ancestry.com. I don't know if you have that where you are, but we have it available at any one of the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library locations. Right now with COVID, they are letting us let our members use it from home. So if you happen to be a member with us, you can use it from home at least through December 31st, and that may be extended. We also have access to Heritage Quest Online, which normally our members can use from home. It has all of the same census records and city directories for the United States that are in Ancestry, as well as other things. Lots of books, about 28,000 books, family and local histories are in there. And then I'm sure you're all familiar with Family Search. FamilySearch.org is the free website of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They have microfilmed and digitized millions of records for all over the world, and most of them are online for free. Sometimes something on the website isn't accessible from home, and it may be available at a family history library affiliate. And if you try to click a record and it tells you that, the Grosvenor Room, if you happen to be visiting us, is a family history library affiliate. So let's get into talking about women. So why is it so challenging? Of course, name changes with marriage can make it difficult. Oftentimes we know either the married or the maiden name, and it can be a challenge to find out the other name. Legal status and identity, the silence of women, gender roles. Women didn't have many rights in the past, especially married women. She lost her identity when she got married. Often we see women listed under her husband's name. She might be listed as Mrs. John Smith, and we don't even know her first name. In New York State, it wasn't until 1848 when women were allowed to keep property they held at the time of marriage. Before that, it would go to her husband. In 1849, married women could have purchased and sold her own property as if she were single. And of course, women were the caregivers and nurturers. They're usually seen and not heard. They're not the breadwinners, and therefore they were usually not on many legal documents. A good book that we have in the Grosvenor Room to learn about the laws pertaining to women state by state in the US is called The Hidden Half of the Family, a source book for women's genealogy by Christina Schaefer. Something, if you're dealing with modern research that is really helpful, is called the Social Security Claims Index. This is in Ancestry.com and Ancestry Library Edition. Social Security didn't start until 1936. This database goes from 1936 to 2007. Not everyone who had Social Security is in this database. Oftentimes someone is in this particular database because they made a change to their Social Security application in some way. And oftentimes that was a name change. And of course, women change their names when they get married or get divorced. So here we see an example, Frances Therese Daly. And we also see a Frances Daly Crowley, and one Crowley is listed. You can see it lists her birth date, September 29th, 1900, her specific place of birth in Pennsylvania. And it will list foreign places of birth, a specific town even. It lists her death date, and then it lists both her parents' names, including her mother's maiden name. And down at the bottom, you can see when those different name changes occurred. Of course, obituaries are always important to genealogy research, but they are extremely useful for women. They're very powerful in finding close family members to the deceased. They often define relationships, provide towns of residence, and provide spouses' names. So when you want to look for obituaries for the woman that you're researching, her husband, parents, siblings, children, in-laws, usually the husband's parents and his siblings, and even grandparents might be helpful. Here's a couple of examples that I thought were good. The first one for Mrs. Elizabeth Bugh, and it gives this great information like her home address, where she was from, and the church she was a member, the funeral home, the cemetery. But it also gives her daughter's name, and you can see it lists the daughter's name, Julie, in parentheses, and that she's Mrs. Lewis Hyman. So you've got her married name there, and it lists the place where she's living in Penfield. And then at the bottom, it lists her two sisters, Mrs. Lena Foley of Rochester. So if you didn't know where her sister was or her sister's married name, it's listed there. And then we've got Miss Anna Rosenbaum. And we can see it's Miss, so that means she's not married. And this obituary didn't give Elizabeth's maiden name. So this could be Elizabeth's maiden name, unless of course they're step or half sisters. That might be different then. For Letty Bortle, we get the same kind of information that we had for Elizabeth. And then if you look at her obituary more closely, it lists a stepmother, Mrs. George Bullman of Fairport. So there, the mother's last name is probably Letty's maiden name. We've got two half sisters, so that's wonderful that, I often see this, obituaries of a certain time frame will specify half relationships, and that can be very helpful. So she's got two half sisters, and then she's got 6 half brothers. And the half brother's last name is Ellsworth. So that could be an indicator of her mother's subsequent marriage. So that is a great find. There are lots of newspaper websites out there. I'm going to talk about a few, but there are many, and these are all going to be on your handout. One is there is an obituary index in Heritage Quest and Ancestry, and it covers obituaries in newspapers.com, which is a subscription website through ancestry.com. And there's lots of Buffalo area newspapers in there about until 1924 for Buffalo. And there's other areas around Western New York as well. And this is great because it abstracts a lot of the information that's in the obituary. So you'll see usually the person's age and their date of death. You might see lots of different family members. You do want to use caution when you're looking at these. I have seen things transcribed wrong. This is computer generated. So I have seen errors, especially with numbers. So if you see an age that looks off, but a lot of the information looks true to your ancestor, be sure to look up that obituary. The obituaries themselves are not in Ancestry. You would have to subscribe to newspapers.com. Of course, if it's a Buffalo newspaper, we have most Buffalo newspapers on microfilm in the Grosvenor room. Of course, we all know about marriage or engagement announcements. This is a great way if you know a woman's, husband's name, but you don't know her married name, to find out her maiden name and her parents' names, as well as the groom's parents' names. This is a more recent addition to Ancestry. It is a newspapers.com marriage index. And I think this is probably just what I would call a baby database right now. I tried searching around for some things I knew should be in there from the newspapers that are in newspapers.com, and I didn't find a lot what I was looking for. So I think this is new and it's still developing. So I suspect there's going to be more added to it over time. The library also has some digital collections. Any of these that you see on our website and on our digital collections page, you can access for free. You don't need a library card or anything like that. You can just go to our website and view these collections. The one that I'd like to point out has an unusual name. It's called The Why of This Book. And it's just a weird name that librarians came up with because that's what it says on the opening page of the book. This book wasn't named. And what it is a number of newspaper transcriptions of marriage announcements from really early Buffalo newspapers. So we're talking 1811 until 1833. We think this was put together for visitors when Buffalo had the Pan American Exposition in 1901, and that was about when this was put together. We think it was for visitors doing early genealogy research. So on the right-hand side, you'll see the marriage transcriptions. It tells you the newspaper that it comes from. It usually lists the town that the person was married in, and then it lists both of the bride and the groom's name. And on the left-hand side, if they found something additional about this couple, they would transcribe that. So you might see an obituary of the bride or groom. You might see a birth of a child or the death of one of their children, or even a marriage of one of their children. And this covers, there weren't that many newspapers in the Western New York area for this time frame. So you will see marriage announcements from all over, like we see Clarence and Canandaigua and Batavia and Pomfret and Sheldon. So we've got various Western New York counties here. I'm not sure, I don't know that I've seen a Canadian one in here, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was one. So when you browse this online, if you go to the back of the book, there is a name index to the marriage announcements, but I found that not all of the items on the left-hand side of the page are indexed. So just keep that in mind when you're looking through it. Something that's really helpful are social columns in newspapers. I was researching this family and I was looking for this woman named Gwendolyn Eberts, and I could not find what happened to her. She had 2 daughters, and I looked at the daughters' marriage announcements, and this lady was not listed in their marriage announcements. And I saw that her husband was remarried, and I, kind of thought, well, she must have died or gotten remarried or something. And I could not find a death for her. I could not find a marriage for her. And it was only this tiny little announcement that told me what happened to her. And what it is it's an announcement that her daughter's fiance visited with her, with Gwendolyn at her home in Rochester. The family was from Northern New York, and it named her as Mrs. Fred Geen, and it gave her address. So this is the only way, this opened up the research for me, and I was able to track her for the rest of her life after this. So I know a lot of us use newspaper websites, and it can be annoying sometimes. Like when you have these small town newspapers and they put all of those, they just kind of list everything that happened. Like someone is selling Girl Scout cookies or baking something, and they kind of becomes annoying sometimes when you see all those things, even though you might like some of it, but you're really trying to find something important and you can't find it. So I just always say, keep digging, look at all of those hits that you get for your person's name, because you might find that one little item that really opens up your research for you. Something you might see, at least in US newspapers, is runaway wife announcements. So if a woman left her husband, he would often put a notice in the newspaper that says that she has deserted his bed and board and that he refuses to pay any bills contracted by her. So if a couple split up, you didn't know when that happened, maybe this would tell you when that happened. Sometimes they're just little brief announcements like this one. This one is from 1903, but sometimes you might see something that's more gossipy. So in this next one, you can see it's longer, and it tells about a rumor that Mrs. Louis Ketzman, daughter of Charles Heckert of Amsterdam, deserted her husband's bed and board and ran away with a teacher named Frank Harlow. So you never know what you might find in these. I recommend searching for your ancestor, even in newspaper databases that you don't necessarily think that they would be in. Like maybe you knew they lived in one location, but you're not sure where they used to live. They might be listed in a probate notice. So if someone was trying to find the heirs of someone, there would be usually a publication put in a newspaper looking for those heirs. And so this one is a rather extreme example. A gentleman named Samuel Farrington died and he didn't have children. So it lists all of these siblings and nieces and nephews in here. There's tons of them. And then if you go into the estate file itself, these are great because they'll list the heirs. Often it will list their relationship to the deceased and then where that person is living. So if you've lost someone or you don't know like a sister's married name, this is a really good place to find it. I'm going to just go through some screens here. This is a little bit of an overkill, but these are all of the people that were listed in this estate file. And they're living a lot in Erie County, but some other places around the country. And then at one part, it talks about this gentleman's sister, Rebecca, who removed to the state of Iowa, and that the only child they knew of was Ezra Cook, but you know, they didn't know what other children there were. So if you knew the name Ezra Cook, then you found out his mother's name and by default, her maiden name, because it would likely be the same last name as Samuel. Remember that women could have estate files too. In this example, we see some excellent information. This is the estate file of a Mary Murphy. It's from 1882 in Erie County. It lists her son, Dennis Corcoran. So perhaps Murphy is, maybe she went back to her maiden name. Maybe it could be that this is a second marriage name. If we look to the bottom, we see that there are two brothers with the last name Hartnett, assuming she's not a half sister, that's probably her maiden name. At the bottom, there's John Hartnett, and it tells the specific location that he lives in Ireland, Lizarda, County Cork, Ireland. So there we have probably where she was from in Ireland. And I've seen a number of these. Don't think that because your ancestor was not so well off and they were an immigrant that they didn't have an estate file, because I have seen this on numerous occasions where they have close relatives who still live in the foreign country. So if you're looking through New York State probate records, many of these are on Family Search. Erie counties, there is an index up until 1929 on Family Search. You have to browse it. And there are actually case files online up until about the year 1900. So when you're looking for your person in these indexes, what you want is the case number. And hopefully the case number that you're looking for has been scanned and put online. And if not, you would have to go through the Erie County Surrogate Court Office. And you have to order them in advance because the old ones are not kept on site. So this is family search. It shows you have to browse through the images and then you have to just click the county that you're interested in. And then you can view the files. Census records, keep in mind that you want to look at everyone who lives in a household. Sometimes in-laws were listed as boarders. Here we see a Thomas Armstead who's listed as a boarder, but that's really the brother of Julia Root, who's listed here as the wife of Lyman Root. And always look around who's living nearby, because these were people didn't get around like we do nowadays, and they often married people who were nearby. This is an example from the 1880 census. Rom Best I underlined, and the family next door. Rom is 21 in this census, and way down at the bottom there's a Margaret L. Strickland who's 2 years old, and Margaret ended up being his third wife. So, always look at people nearby. You never know. In this example, we have 3 different families, the Livermore, a couple of Livermore families, a Fancher family, and a Sartwell family. And the one that I boxed off, Charles Fancher married William Sartwell's granddaughter. And the Livermores that are starred are the brothers of Callista Fancher, who is also starred. So often families lived nearby. So you want to investigate those that lived nearby. One thing that you can do, it is something more extreme, but if you want to go through census records for the towns that a woman lived in, if you say only her married name, you can go through the census records for the town they lived in and identify heads of households, and then look for probate records of males and perhaps females old enough to be the father of someone's wife. So you may find the daughter with the correct married surname in the probate file. The New York State censuses are great. A lot of you probably know about US censuses that go from 1790 through 1940. That's what we have for research right now, every 10 years. But New York State took additional censuses, often on the 5-year mark. And I really like the 1855, 65, and 75 censuses. One thing that they do that the federal censuses don't do for this time frame is that they list the relationship to the head of household. It wasn't until 1880 that federal censuses started doing this. So these state censuses list the relationships. So we know for sure someone is someone's wife, or you see an older female living with someone. Like here we have a Jane Smith living with Oscar Smith, and it lists her as his mother. That's something that we often suspect, but we don't necessarily know for sure. And this census points out the relationship. These censuses for these years also list the county in New York that someone was born if they were born in New York State. So some of these people that are listed here are older, and they would have been born in the 1790s, and this tells the county that they were born in. The 1855 census, it has some marriage and death information. It's kind of oddly laid out. I put a dotted line between the two different sets of data. These are usually mixed in at the end of a section, like usually at the end of a town. And to the left, we have the marriages. And the couple is not named, but we do get the age of the bride and groom. We get the previous, it says civil condition, so whether they were married or widowed or divorced, what month they were married, and then the place of marriage, if it's different from where the person currently lives. So if you think your ancestor was married in this time frame and the ages look right for the couple, say you can't find their marriage, maybe you're trying to look for church records. You could see what towns are listed that might match up with your ancestor. And some of these towns, this is from Chautauqua County, New York, if you know where that is. It's south of Buffalo, and it's got locations, like one is Northern New York, Omar, New York, and one is Buffalo, which would have been a ways away in that time frame. So this could help you perhaps find a marriage record. To the right is death information. Again, it doesn't name the individuals, but it's got an age, it's got the gender, it's got their ethnicity, and then it's got some death information. So if you know someone might have died during this time frame, maybe you could make a theory that this is one of your ancestors. The 1865 census lists. We have some antiquated terminology here. Inquiries related to the deaf and dumb, blind, insane, idiotic. And here we have an example. It doesn't, the form itself, the additional inquiry doesn't name the person, but it tells the page and line number that you can find them on. And in this example, it pertained to a woman named Mary Elizabeth Smith, and it lists her as idiotic, and the cause was that she fell from her mother's arms and that she had this condition for 24 years, and she's 25 years old. And it says she's able to do housework. So it tells the circumstances of why she might have been listed like this in the census. And, that's a story you might not hear about any other way. We're lucky in that in 1865 and 75, marriages are listed again, and this time they name the married couple. So you can see the groom is on the left, the bride is on the right. It tells whether, their marital condition before they got married. It gives their age. And a number of these have a name in parentheses for the woman. So the name in parentheses is the maiden name. So we get the previous married name, the name that they're getting married under, and then it's got the maiden name in parentheses, which is wonderful. And then it has the date of the marriage, where the marriage took place, and then what type of ceremony. So if it was by a clergyman, it would list the religion. So maybe you didn't know the family's religion, and this will really help you find some church records about your female ancestors. It tells whether it was a civil marriage or if it was a declaration before witnesses. Deaths were also listed. The 1865 census, it separately kept military deaths because of the US Civil War. They were very focused on Civil War soldiers, so those were kept separate. But the 1875 deaths, they're all together. So you've got the person named, you've got their age and their gender and their color and their marital status and the date of death, where they were born. Usually it's a state or a country, and the cause of death. And this is an early time frame where you often wouldn't find deaths in at least the New York State area for this time frame. The 1850 through 1880 censuses took extra schedules called mortality schedules. So we would see the name of somebody who died the year before the census. And that's how the marriage and the death schedules for the state, it's the exact year before the census was taken is when those marriages and deaths took place. And that's where these deaths took place. So I thought this one was an interesting example because it lists the people who died and where they were born and the month and their cause of death. But then at the bottom, there's a section for remarks, and it told a little more information about the person's death. Like for Mary Geithner, on the top part, it lists she was killed by a falling wall. And then down at the bottom, it says she was killed by the falling walls of the New York Central Railroad elevator. This was in Buffalo. There were also agricultural schedules taken for both the 1855 through 75 state censuses and the 1850 through 1880 federal censuses. There are even more federal ones taken, actually. But don't forget that women could be listed on these. Often we think of men for these schedules, but women were listed too, often when they were widows. And this would give information about the acreage of their farm, the value of their farm, laborers, like the number of laborers, the different crops they grew, the different cattle that they had. So you can learn a lot of great details about the person's life. These are in all of these censuses that I mentioned, the state censuses and these mortality schedules, they are in Ancestry. Oftentimes, at least with Ancestry Library Edition, you will see at the bottom of the screen where it says census records. And if you click all, you'll see some of those special schedules listed. So the mortality schedules are usually grouped together, and then the non-population schedules is where the agricultural schedules would be found. Divorces. In New York State from 1787 through 1847, there was the Chancery Court who could grant divorces for adultery and also separations and annulments. And then from 1847 forward, the New York Supreme Court, every county in New York has one, would grant divorces. But the only grounds for divorce was adultery. Divorce for other reasons required an act of state legislature, which was very uncommon. The plaintiff was usually granted the right to remarry after the divorce. And then the adulterer was usually restricted from being married again, but they often did remarry in another state. So if you had that situation, you might want to look around to other states for a marriage for that person. Of course, couples, if they didn't have an adultery situation, the couple might have sought divorce from another state or country. Reno, Nevada was popular in the 20th century. Some people went to Mexico for a divorce. And sometimes couples may have separated without legal proceedings. I have a couple of examples of that in my family, actually. Erie County Clerk's Office is where you can get these from. So clerk's offices, county clerk's offices for New York State. If you go to Erie County, you would go to the Basement Record Center at the Erie County Clerk's Office. I have tried to order some really old divorces before. It was from the 1860s and they didn't still have it. So sometimes they may not have kept an older record. Divorces are closed for 100 years in New York State, though you can obtain a certificate of dissolution, which provides the names, date, and type of dissolution of the marriage. So whether it was a divorce, annulment, or separation. And of course, you may find an announcement of a divorce in newspapers. Vital records are wonderful. Marriages, obviously, for finding a woman's maiden name and maybe a previous married name. So when you're looking at a marriage record, keep in mind it could be a prior married name or the maiden name. In this example, we do have the name of the bride as she's getting married under Smith, but that her maiden name is Summer, and it does list the parents' names and the mother's maiden name too. At the library, we do have Erie County marriage records from 1877 through 1935 on microfilm. In Ancestry, there are New York County marriage records for the timeframes that you see listed here. Not every county is in here. So you want to look at the browse part that I've pointed to with an arrow and see what counties are included. Erie County is not included in these, and there's a few other counties not included. But if you find someone that you actually can see the marriage license in this database. Birth records. We do have Buffalo birth records from 1878 through 1913 on microfilm. There is no index to them. They're roughly in order by date. You will see the person who's born. So we see Marie Margaret Metz and her parents' names, including her mother's maiden name. And it will tell where the parents were born. And keep in mind that these often usually tell how many children the woman gave birth to and how many are still living. So there's another detail about your female ancestor's life. So we have some really early Buffalo births, so like 1878 through 1881, we have a lot of the birth returns that we have did not include the given name of the children. It would just say the parent's name and the gender of the child. But sometimes we find these things mixed in supplemental reports of a given name of a child. And So it would tell the given name of the child, usually at a time frame when the child was an adult. They could be, quite older at the time of this. And usually they would have a family member vouch for them. So oftentimes you see brothers and sisters vouching for each other. So if you didn't know what happened to someone's female ancestor, like if you didn't know what happened to somebody's sister, maybe one of these exists, and you might find the married name of someone's sister here. Here we see a Hazel Backus Gold, which is this George Backus's sister, and it lists where she's living at the time that they made this report. We also have some delayed birth certificates. These cover people who were born from about 1864 through 1913 in the city of Buffalo. And why people often got one of these was when Social Security started in 1936, they may have applied for a delayed birth in the 1930s and 1940s because they needed that proof. Also, some men joining the military, especially for World War II, they might have needed proof of birth and they didn't have a birth certificate. New York State's births weren't considered complete until about 1913. So that's why we see people born in this time frame getting these certificates. And this is one of those records, again, that someone had to vouch for them. So obviously you could find one of these for your female ancestors, but you could find someone's sister listed here. So the child here is Walter McConnell, and his sister with her married name, Jeanette Chester, is listed, vouching for him, and it gives where she's living at the time. And what's neat at the top, it tells the ways in which they might have proven their birth, whether it was a baptismal record, family Bible, like a military record. I like that one of the choices was a library record. But if it's a baptismal certificate, oftentimes you see the church name listed here, which obviously could open up, more records for you. Cemetery plots are great. We were talking about Forest Lawn Cemetery earlier. This is an example from Forest Lawn Cemetery. A lot of the, this Forest Lawn has scanned and put their burial registers and their plot registers, their death registers online, but their plot registers that they put online are the most modern version of those registers. At the library, we have the old registers. So this might look a little different. It could include a little different detail on it. So usually the cemetery plots, if your family had a plot, oftentimes besides the name and either the date of death or date of burial, in the remarks column, it will say how the person being buried there is related to the owner of the plot. So in this example, we have a Julia White in George Vining's burial plot, and it says she's a widow of owner by former marriage. So this White is likely a second or subsequent married name of Julia. And of course, we might have examples of, daughters or granddaughters in these. Here you can see a few examples of some daughters that were buried in their father's plot. Gravestones, always go and look at the gravestones. Oftentimes a woman's married or maiden name is listed on the gravestones. Deeds. Oftentimes when you look at deeds, they will include the wife's given name on it, but oftentimes, the wife's family and the husband might have interchanged land with each other. So you want to look at who the husband sold or bought land from. And as this example, this is one of my ancestors, Stephen Hoffman, and he's buying land from his father-in-law from his first marriage, Martin Myers. So pay attention to those people and research them. Look at the witnesses to records. This is Stephen Polson. It's got his wife Agnes on here. This is a baptismal record of one of their children. And the witnesses that we see at the bottom, Julia Nowicki, is Agnes's sister. So always look at those witnesses and research them and see how they connect to your family. This is another example of my Stephen Hoffman, and William Myers is his brother-in-law. This is his naturalization. This is information about his naturalization. Naturalization records are great for the US, especially 1906 forward. This is where you're going to find someone's foreign place of birth. In this example, we see a Sadie Basowitz, and it lists the specific place she was born in Russia, that she was Hebrew. It lists her husband's name, when and where they were married, and that was in Russia, where she's currently residing, all of her children and where they were born and where they're currently residing, and also her last place of foreign residence and when and where she came over to the US. A little bit about women and children for naturalization in the US from 1855 through 1922. Women and minor children under the age of 21 became naturalized to the male head of family. So it would be either their father or their husband. And they're before 1906, especially, they wouldn't usually be listed on the naturalization records themselves. They would just have to prove that their husband or father was naturalized in order to prove that they were a citizen. From late 1922 to the present, alien minor children became naturalized to their parents. And after late September 1922, alien women had to naturalize themselves. There were some unfair rules for women. So American-born women from March 2nd, 1907 through September 22nd, 1922 lost their citizenship if they married an alien due to the Expatriation Act of 1907. And so when that happened, when she married an alien, she would take the nationality of her husband. And still in this time frame, if her husband then became naturalized, she would become naturalized. And then for this extended even further, if an American woman got married to an Asian man, there were more restrictions on Asians. So up until into March of 1931, that rule still applied for those that married Asian men. There was even this resolution that was done apologizing for this in 2014. I liked that they apologized for this. The Senate, Congress apologized to women for this in 2014. This is an example of a form. So when these women lost their citizenship, they would have to naturalize. So this is an example of that. We have a Florence Liu Wong, and it says right on here that she was born in New York, New York. And it says at this time that her nationality was China. It tells where her husband was born at a specific location in China. You know, it still has all that information about the children, but this is an example of a woman who was born in the US getting naturalized because she lost it by marrying her foreign husband. Naturalization records, they can, for New York State, they can be found through the county a lot of times, at least up until 1929 or so. This can vary from county to county. Beginning in late 1906, people often got naturalized at the US District Court, which if they were naturalized at those courts, you can obtain the records through the National Archives. We do have an index in the Grosvenor Room for these naturalizations for the district court. Some of these naturalizations are online for Erie County, and a lot of other Western New York counties too, they're online. So there is an index in Family Search. It's a card file. If you go to this particular record, the link is on the handout. You can look through a card file of naturalizations, and some of them are online, but a lot of them you do have to go to Erie County Hall to obtain them. If you're looking for an image of your ancestor, you could try to look for passports. US passports are available from 1795 through 1925 in Ancestry and also on Family Search. This one you can see there's a nice family portrait. A lot of times with women, we have to research the husband or the children. We have to research the men in their lives to find out information about them. Here's some examples of military records. This is one of my ancestors, James Bentley, and he was in the Civil War. It says he was born in Delaware County, New York. And to the right, I apologize, this is the best quality image I could get, but it tells the names of his parents, John and Mary Barrow. This is the only way that I found his Mary's maiden name. And so I looked at this family further in the censuses just to prove, some of these things in the censuses, these connections. You've got John and Maria Bentley there with James, their son, and next door we have Hugh Burroughs, and Mary's maiden name was Barrow. And then when I looked further, so this is the 1850 census in Allegheny County, New York. When I looked at 1855, that has all of that great extra information about the counties where people were born. We see a bunch of people living nearby, including Hugh Burrow, that were born in Delaware County, New York, where it said James Bentley was born. So perhaps his mom was born there too. And it does say Mary was born in Delaware County. So these could be perhaps siblings of Mary. Military pensions are one of my favorite record sets. You want to look for the records of somebody's husband, for a widow, for her children, the children of the servicemen. Look for that of an ex-husband. Look for that of a second wife of your ancestor. Ancestry has a lot of different indexes to pension files, like the War of 1812, Civil War, Revolutionary War pensions. There is actually complete pension files for the Revolutionary War in Ancestry and Heritage Quest. I believe these are on Family Search too. Fold 3, if any of you subscribe to that, this is not something we have at the library. Actually, the War of 1812 pension files, which I'm pointing out, are online for free. So if you have War of 1812 folks, a lot of them are online for free. I believe they only go for New York State up until like around the letter S or T, but that's an ongoing project. This is an example of a War of 1812 widow's pension. And it's got the name of the soldier, Elias. It's got his parents' names, Elijah and Charlotte. It's got her name prior to marriage, which was Sophronia Cordelou, and the name of her parents, Isaac Bassett and Sarah. So obviously Bassett was her maiden name. And so Cordelou was a prior married name. It's got information about when and where the couple was married and by whom. And then further in the pension file, it lists information about her and her husband's former wife. It says that she was married to William Cordelou in May of 1847, that he died in Sheboygan, Wisconsin in 1854, and that her husband, the soldier Elias, died. He was married to a former wife named Sally Warden, who died in La Maritime in November 1860 in the state of Wisconsin. It was very important in these widows' pensions to prove that the marriage was legal. So they would have to tell about a previous husband's death and then about the death of a previous wife to make sure that the marriage was legal. In this example, this is from a Revolutionary War pension file. You might see affidavits from witnesses to either the military service or a marriage. So if it was a widow's pension, this was a widow's pension. We've got Hannah Hamlin, the sister of Martha Munson, and it tells Hannah's that she was 77 years of age on the 4th day of March last, so we can figure out her birth date. And this is Revolutionary War, so this is very early. And that Martha is 4 years and 6 months older than the deponent, and that Martha was married to Samuel Munson at her father's house in the town of Bristol in the county of Hartford and state of Connecticut. It gives the reverend's name and where he was from, and the date of the marriage. So obviously a lot of great information about women there. This is an example from my James Bentley's Civil War pension file. It tells, it's a widow's pension. His wife, Elizabeth, was trying to get the pension, and it tells when she was born, a specific date when she was born, and when they were married and where they were married, and that they were married by a justice of the peace, and when he died. And this is one of the case that the marriage wasn't legal. So James was married previously, and he and his wife separated and never got a legal divorce. Even though he married Elizabeth, his second wife, through a justice of the peace, the marriage wasn't legal. So in the end, Elizabeth couldn't get the pension. But this is one of the reasons why I love pension files, because where else are you going to learn this information? It tells where James used to live. It tells the second married name of his former wife, Mrs. Mary McCarty. So, you always want to dig in these pension files. Bible records. These are often used as proof of marriages or births for pension files. And you never know what family member is going to have that Bible record in the pension file. So you want to look for, all of the different children that might have been in the military, the father, the widow. You never know where you might find these. The Western New York Genealogical Society's collection is in our library, and they do have some Bible records transcribed and put in these books. You can look in a card file and it'll tell you what volume to look in. And then if you find something of interest, they have photocopies of these Bible records, which you can get for a small fee from them. The Daughters of the American Revolution has some Bible records partially transcribed online. So you can look for someone in their database. And if you find someone, then you can get copies for a fee. Another way to look for Bible records is by using worldcat.org, which is a library catalog of all different libraries all over the world. So I recommend putting in the subject terms Bible records and then whatever state or location you're looking for. You could also try putting the term Bible records and then the family. So in my search, I did Bible records root family. I have some roots. If you have African-American research, Freedmen's Bank records are great. This was a bank set up after the Civil War to try to protect freed persons' money. That ended up failing, but the individuals who signed up for this bank had to fill out these really detailed applications. And so on the right, we have an Easter Wilson. It tells the date that she signed up. It tells where she was born, Lancaster in Kentucky, where she was brought up, her current residence, her age, her complexion, her occupation, who she's currently working for, her husband's name. If she had children, they would be listed. It lists her father and mother's names. It will often list brothers and sisters' names. Oftentimes, if these people are deceased, it will list that information on this record. If you look to the left, this is actually an application for her mother, Melinda Davis. So oftentimes families might have gone together to sign up for an account. So you want to look all over the page. Those are in Family Search, and those are also in Heritage Quest. There's also Freedmen's Bureau records. Freedmen's Bureau was set up to help freed people after the Civil War, but sometimes they would help Caucasians as well who were affected by the war. These are ration records. So to the left, you'll see somebody's name, you'll see their residence, you'll see whether they're white or African-American, and then why they're applying for rations and what they asked for. Over in the remarks column, all the way to the right, you see detail about that person, like Mrs. Mahoney was a widow and she has 3 children. Someone else's husband deserted her. Someone's husband was sick. There was also sometimes almost like a census of freed persons. It's called a register of freedmen for certain locations. So you'll see somebody's name, both men and women are listed here, their age, their color, their occupation, their residence, and look, it lists their former slaveholder's name on there and the place that they lived when they were enslaved. There are also some freedmen's contracts. So if a freed person wanted to work for someone, they would set up these contracts. In this particular example, we see a Mr. Wiley Lee, but it also lists his daughter's name. So Laura and Martha were his daughters. So we see that family connection there. And sometimes these people would work for their former slaveholder. So you want to really investigate the person that they're working for as a potential former slaveholder. Those records, the Freedmen's Bureau record that I talked about, are online for free on Family Search, and they're keyword searchable. Of course, we know about family and local histories. A lot of times when we're looking at local histories, we might see biographies in there about some citizens. A lot of times they are about men, but sometimes we'll even see images of women, and we'll often see details about the women in his family. So the daughter and the wife, and who the wife's parents are, and you might see birth dates of his children. Also look for family reunion publications. Sometimes, these might have genealogical data in them, general family history, but oftentimes these will list who attended the reunion. And if you lost track of a woman or don't know her married name, you might see them listed here. So in this example, it's the Balk Family Association, and we have a Mrs. Ella Balk Simpson of East Milton, and then a Mrs. Lillian Balk Mason of Newton Center, Massachusetts. So we've got their married name and where they're living at the time of this publication. And always look at family trees. I think we all know that sometimes things might not be right in family trees, but they could be right, especially if you see a lot of documents associated with the tree. So always search for your ancestors in there, and use these as clues, and then try to prove what you find. Heritage Quest online is a great place to find local and family histories. There's about 28,000 family histories in there. Alumni publications are great places to look for women. This is an example in our collection, the Buffalo Female Academy 25th anniversary, 1851 through 1876. It goes class by class for graduates. It lists them, and it will list where they're currently living, if they're still alive, or it might list their date and place of death. We also have another one for the seminary yearbook for 1905, but this particular one gives alumni information back into the 1860s, and it has these nice reports about the women and where they're living. It might list their children's names, if they have a career, their husband's name, maybe even when they got married and where they got married. And often modern day publications for colleges, they often still do list both the married and maiden name, and they still might list a husband's name and children's names. I've seen this in a Buffalo, I think it was one of the Buffalo State colleges. We have one, I think it's for 2008, and it still listed that type of information in it. Lineage Society applications. We have these American Revolution, Sons of the American Revolution membership applications in Ancestry. So these will go for, it'll list the person who was applying, and it will go all the way back, direct line descendants to the Revolutionary War soldier, and maybe even a generation beyond that. And it'll usually give the birth and marriage and death information for those couples. The Daughters of the American Revolution website, you can download some applications for a fee. So you could put in a Revolutionary soldier and then see what might exist. And then oftentimes these applications listed the children of the Revolutionary ancestor. So here we've got some names and their dates of birth and who they got married to. Of course, we know about religious records, baptisms and marriages and deaths, but I do like to remind people that you could have been baptized as an adult. So, if you don't have a baptism when someone was a child, look for when someone was an adult. This is a Livingston County, New York record. And what I'm looking at is for Julia Root, and it lists her place of birth and it lists her date of birth. And to the right, it lists her parents' name, Thomas and Mary Armstead. So, look for those because they could include that detail that you need. Court records, I just like to poke around in any kind of clerk's offices for any kind of clerk books. Oftentimes in New York clerk's offices, there's something called clerk registers, and they're usually related to the county Supreme Court. And I like to just poke through those. You might see, usually you'll see civil court cases, and you never know what you could find in those. I found some name change documents for some of my ancestors in there. You might see other types of cases. This is where you would usually find the divorces listed. This is something you might see. You might see people could sue for alienation of affection. This is from the Buffalo Evening News, and for a certain time frame, if someone had an affair, say someone's wife had an affair, the husband could sue the person that she had an affair with. So you never know, you might find one of these cases associated with your ancestor. You might find court records or newspaper articles. Court reporters. These are published accounts of judicial opinions, and you never know what you find. I recommend if you have any law libraries that might subscribe to databases, just keyword searching for your ancestor's name in here. This is a case where someone was accused of bigamy. It was like he got a divorce, but he got remarried too soon according to the ruling of his divorce. So he was charged with bigamy, and it gives all this marriage information in here as well. We have a database. It's actually a local Buffalo company called Hein Online, where a lot of these records are in here, and it's really easy to search. I usually just put the first name space W/5, so within 5 words of, and then the last name, and you can find all kinds of things. This resulted in some criminal reports, so it's not only civil records you might find in here, but you might find some criminal cases associated with your ancestor, and they can be kind of detailed. So these are things you might not find elsewhere. Of course, you want to look for things like letters and diaries and scrapbooks. So look at women who lived in the same community, maybe of the same social status. Maybe they'll be mentioned in that woman's, your ancestors might be mentioned in that woman's letters, or you just might get an idea of what your ancestor's life might have been like. The library and their digital collections, we do have a few diaries in here, a couple from women, so you can see what a woman's life was like during the time frames. I think they're both from the 1930s. We do have a collection of scrapbooks at the library, which are mainly newspaper clippings, and we have this really big set that's local biographies, and there are a number of clippings associated with women. There is an index to main subjects of these scrapbooks. We have some scrapbooks. We have scrapbooks on tons of topics. Another one that women are often featured in is our scrapbooks on clubs. This is the Golden Wedding Club, and it lists these couples who had their golden anniversary and when they got married. We do have a number of clubs, women's club publications at the library. This is the Zonta Club, and sometimes they have social columns. Here we have a lady named Enola Hewitt that was visiting Little Rock, Arkansas, where her son was located. And it's got the name of her granddaughter there, little Betty Lee Hewitt. And I always recommend looking for bibliographies to research women in the community. This is one we have at the library, Women's History Sources, a guide to archives and manuscript collections in the US. And it goes state and then by city and town and lists all different kinds of special collections associated with women, whether it's manuscripts or speeches or photos or diaries, scrapbooks. Another good place to look for these special collections on women is Archive Grid. It's kind of like WorldCat, but it's for archival collections. So it's a union catalog of different archival collections. So just put, the name of a city or state and the keyword women, and you might find something, or even your ancestor's name, especially if she was a more prominent person, and see if there's any collections associated with her. Institutional records, look for poorhouse and prison and old folks homes and orphanages. At the library, we have poorhouse registers for Erie County. They start in the late 1820s and go up into 1952. There are a lot of women in these poorhouse records. Many of these are digitized and put online. Here we see a couple of examples of women that are underlined. A lot of times people went into these homes not only because they were destitute, but they might have been seeking medical care. So to the left, we see a little bit about these people, their age and nativity and occupation and when they went in the home. And then we see why they were put in the home. For these women, we see, some are destitute. We often see women who are pregnant listed. Another lady is listed as simple. We have, if you have Native American ancestry, we have Thomas Indian School records, their annual reports for 1881 through 1942. And it lists all of the people every year. It lists who was in the home and then their nationality. So most are Seneca, but you might see some other tribes there. And there might be reports, like under the Scholastic Department report, we might see information. This lists a few of the female students and what they're doing with their lives now, where they went to school after the Indian school, and then what they're doing later on. We have some Buffalo Central High School registers from 1865 to 1909. The boys and the girls are usually kept separate records. We'll see, this is an example where we see the names, their ages, their religion, their date of admission. It gives information about their grades and exams. Some of them list where they were prepared before they went to high school, which may tell us their previous residence. So this is a Buffalo school. We see someone lived in Cheektowaga, somebody lived in Batavia, which is Genesee County. Some of the really early ones will list the name of the parent or guardian, and then these students' residence. And this one also lists religious denomination. I'm almost done. One of the last things here I'm going to tell you is to look at middle names or given names of your ancestors, of your living relatives, and question things if something's a little unusual. This is one of my family's, Carlton Livermore Fancher. And of course, Livermore is very unusual. And if you look to the right, I put where the Livermore comes in my family. So there's me down at the bottom. And my great, great, great grandmother's name was Callista Livermore. And this is her grandchild, Carlton Livermore Fancher. So look into those names that look a bit unusual. This is another example. My aunt's middle name is Ray, R-A-E, and she was named Ray for her great grandmother's middle name, which was Christina Ray Bentley, and who Christina got Ray from her mother's maiden name, Elizabeth Ray. And just, sometimes you can luck out by just doing searches on the internet. In this example, I collaborated with somebody. I have a root family, and I learned that somebody had roots, and I asked him about it, and he started just Googling my ancestor's name, Aretus Lyman Root, and came up with this family history. And it's got a gentleman named Colonel James Lyman, who had a son named Aretus, so Aretus Lyman, who had a sister, I'm sorry, and then James had Princess as a daughter, so sister to Aretus, who married a Mr. Root and removed to the state of New York West, so Western New York, and that's where my family is from. And someone actually hand wrote in this book that's online, Able Root. And I have found connections. I do believe Princess is my Aretus Lyman Root's mother, and I do believe Abel is his father. There's these early land transactions for Western New York. The Holland Land Company sold the early land in Western New York, and we have these indexes at the library from 1804 through 1835, and it's a good way to find early connections. The information in that book can be used on this New York Heritage website, the Holland Land Company archives, to find the actual records themselves. And look, I found the connection between Aretus Lyman Root and Able Root right here. They bought land together. So it kind of proved who his parents were through that family history. And that's everything that I have for you. I hope I didn't go too much over time. I hope it's not horrible.
That's all right. That's all right. Wow, what a great talk, and just a lot of great information. Now, you had mentioned about your handout. Would you drop that into the chat window, or are you going to email that to me?
I'm going to email it to you.
Okay, so everybody on the call tonight, as soon as I get it from our speaker, I will email it out to everyone else. So that won't be a problem. Is there any questions? I know we're a bit over here. I'll just give people a moment. People are, thank you so much from White Rock, British Columbia. Joanne's absolutely amazing. Beverly, great information. And yeah, Elaine, thank you very much. I think everybody's very pleased. They don't seem to have any questions for you.
Okay. I threw a lot of information out there. If you have questions later on, get them to Steve. He can get them to me, and I'll be happy. Or email the library if you want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We got to keep you busy at the library. So on behalf of the Niagara branch, we just want to thank you very much for speaking tonight. And for everybody who joined us tonight, thank you for attending. Remember, membership is an opportunity to support the society and the Niagara branch, and to allow us to keep doing the good things that we do. So have a good night, and thanks for coming out, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.